Hi guys, I'm Ruth from Beltane Gifts and welcome to the crafting Chez. Today I've been making needle felted brooches and I thought I'd show you how. Now these were the first things that I made when I started doing kits. They have changed a bit over the years. When they first started out I used to make the felted brooches round and they would have just a felt circle on the back that had been glued on and then just had sewn on brooch back. These days I've moved on to these, which, just pop that forward if you can see, which have got a metal back, which is quite nice, and I do these in either the landscape or the portrait format. They make great gifts and they're a perfect thing to start on if you wanted to just have a go at felting something flat but don't want to have to spend lots and lots of time on it. Now the strange thing about these is they do actually take the same amount of time to do one of these as it does to make a small 15cm square picture, and that's because of the amount of stabs that you have to do. So with the larger picture you do the same number of stabs but they're more spread out. With these it's all about the detail, so this is a great one if you wanted to try something and just get used to using that needle. So to do that you will need the usual suspects. We've got our bag of rice to work on, we've got our finger protectors which go on the index finger and thumb of the hand that's going to be holding your work. These are especially useful for this because we are doing something so small and detailed that your fingers are going to get in the way, so definitely would recommend these if you're starting out. You will see in the video that I do occasionally put my uncovered finger in the way. It's just natural. Your brain says that there's something on your fingers and it wants you to do something about it, so you just use your uncovered finger instead. If you catch yourself doing that, just try and get it out of the way, and just, I tend to hold things like this now just to keep those unsafe fingers just out of the way of the needle. And talking of needles, this is the one we're going to be using. This is my green needle, which for me is the shortest and finest needle, and this is a generic one, so you just go by length for the generic needles. So it's in its holder. I always like to use a holder when I'm doing the needle felting, just because I find after a while if I'm doing lots of felting I do tend to get a little bit crampy in my hand. This helps, just it's a bit more comfortable for you to hold. So it comes like this with the needle nice and safe inside the handle. You just give the little wooden bung that's holding the needle just a little twizzle and just pull, and that's your needle there attached to the bung. It's just got a little groove, if you can see that in the bung there. So that little groove is what the needle goes in. What you do now is you just turn the needle, turn the bung just 180 degrees and pop it back onto the needle. And the needles, I'm not sure if you can see that, got just like a little L shape. So the little L goes just at the top, which is the narrowest part of the bung, and then goes back into the holder. Just give that a little push so it's nice and secure, and that's your needle there, safe in the handle. Now I'll also be using one of these, which is just the metal brooch back. It's just a metal oval that's got a brooch back attached. Now I'm not sure if you can see, but there's a slight difference in the height for the brooch back, so it tends to be towards the top here, and that is so that when you're wearing it, it hangs down slightly. If you had it the other way, it would hang like so, which means you wouldn't be able to see it as well. So always make sure when you're attaching your felted piece to your brooch back that the smallest gap is towards the top. That's your top. Okay. You're also going to need one of these. This is just a piece of pre-cut acrylic felt. You can use the wool-based felt. I find with this you don't really need to so much because you're not felting into this piece of felt, you're actually felting through it, if that makes sense. So when you stab, you're pushing small amounts of your felt fibre through this material and it comes out the other side, and what that does is it just kind of locks it into place. The more you stab, the closer together you stab, the more felting fibre, wool fibre you're pushing through your felt, and that gives you a nice solid piece just to work on so that you don't lose your shape, and it gives you something to stick into your brooch back as well. Now the fibre I'm going to be using is slightly different to the fibre I've been using in the other workshops. In the other workshops I've been using roving. Now roving's sheep's wool that's been taken off the sheep, it's been washed to get rid of all the impurities and the lanolin, which is the natural oils for the sheep's wool. And once that's all been stripped out of it, what they do is they put it through a machine, and the machine is like dog's brushes. If you've got a dog at home, you've got one of those brushes with the really fine teeth. It's like two of those going in different directions, and what they do is they catch the long fibres and they drag them out so that they're all going in the same direction, which makes this sort of wool, the tops, the roving, makes it perfect for spinning with because everything's going as you want it. It's great for sort of knitting with if you're doing the arm knitting or if you're using the really jumbo needles. The only thing is when you're felting with it, the fibres, if they're all going in the same direction, when you stab in, your needle slips between the fibres rather than pushing them together. What we want to do is really knit those fibres together to create our felt. Now to do that, what I usually do in the workshops is I'll take the tops of the roving, I'll pull them apart and I'll make them as messy as I can before I start. And you'll find the messier the fibre is before you start, the smoother the finishes that you get at the end. You can do it for these, but you will find the longer fibres end up with lots of wispy ends. Now if you're working on something this small, that's really going to be noticeable. So what we want is something shorter. So with wool fibre, it's called a staple. What we want is a very short staple. Now to do that, what I'm using is this stuff, which I'm not sure if you can see. It's quite fluffy, and the fibres, it's really hard to see, but the fibres are very short, so they're naturally about so long, whereas your tops or roving would be normally about this long. Now these are called broken tops. It's the tops fibres that have been put through the carding machine, and the thing that comes out the end, the waste product, is the broken tops. It's the fibres that have broken during the process. They're too short now to be used for things like spinning unless you're doing a different sort of spinning, but they are perfect for this sort of felting. These ones here, I've brought in the plain merino broken tops and I've dyed them using acid dyes in the microwave. It's a great thing to do, so if any of you fancy having a go, it's something you can do at home. You just need basic kit and access to a microwave. And what I've done is once I've put them through the process of dyeing, they've been dyed, they've been heated up, they've been cooled down, they've been washed to get rid of excess dye, they've been dried because you don't want to be working with wet fibre. And then what I've done is I've taken different colours and I've mixed them together just to give a bit of texture. You'll find that if you mix your fibres together before you felt them in, you get a smoother transition, you get a nicer mix. You can mix your fibres afterwards and just layer them, but you will notice the difference. You get like a striation of different bands of colour. If you mix your fibres first and then felt them, you get that blended colour, which is much nicer to work with. Now when I'm working with something this small as the brooch, you'll find if you just use plain colours, it does come out slightly cartoony almost, so because you get those rich, just pure colours. If you blend the fibres together and then felt them, you end up getting a more natural artistic effect. So this way you get your fibres to work for you. You don't have to do as much felting, but you get a nicer finish. You get more professional finish almost, because you're getting those different colours blended in together. So yes, I've got these different colours here. I like to keep all of the bits and bobs. You'll find that some of these just a tiny little section. You'd probably think when you've finished a project, oh, it's no good, I'm just going to get rid of it. Don't get rid of it. I normally have a great big box full of just little leftovers from workshops and projects that I've got, and then what I will do is I'll either blend them together if they're all the same length, or I will use them for other projects, or they're perfect for doing these little brooches because you only need the tiniest amount of fibre. Now when I say about if they're the same length, the reason I do that is if you try blending together different fibres of different lengths, so from different breeds of sheep or just different lengths of fibre in general, you'll find that they don't blend together very well because the longer fibres are always going to stick out the ends. So when you're blending, you can do it by hand, you can use carders to do, which is what I use. Always make sure that the fibres are roughly the same length before you start, otherwise, as I say, you're just going to end up with piece of fibre like this and then extra fibres just sticking out the end in a different colour, and it just doesn't look good. So if you're interested in having a go and just following along with the video, feel free to do that if you've got the kit at home already. I do sell specific kits for this on the website or in the shop. If you don't see them on the website, feel free to just message me, or you can email me. Check out the website, it's got all the details there. Also, if you wanted to subscribe, there's the button just below. Okay, so today you're going to need the usual tools, so the finger protectors, a needle to work with. Today we're using the finest needle, which is the green needle, and a felting surface to work on, which is our bag of rice. You're also going to need a metal brooch back, which you can see in the top right hand corner, and also a pre-cut oval that will fit into that brooch made out of acrylic felt. It's the green oval you can see on the cushion. Now today's fibre we're using is merino broken tops. So before we normally use roving, the broken tops is the fibres left over through the process of making roving. So the fibres for this are messier and shorter, which are perfect for detailed work. Now lay your fibre over the top. This is the blue section, which is going to be the sky. So we want to cover about 3/4 of the oval from the top down. And when I'm stabbing very lightly, just going through the felt and the fibre into the cushion. Don't want to go too deeply into the cushion because we don't want to felt the fibre to the cushion. We're also stabbing very close together, and the closer you stab together, the smoother the surface is when you're finished. And because we're working on such a fine product, we want it to be very smooth. The smaller your project is, the finer you need to do your felting just to give it the better finish. So I'm working around the outside edge, trying to hit just the felt, not the fibre that's outside of the felt oval, and just lifted that up. If you could see the back, there's some little fibres that have been pushed through, which is what we want. That's showing that you've attached it well enough to the felt backing. And I was just pulling off some of the excess fibre because I'd put too much on. So if you're going to have to remove some of the fibre because it's quite short, it's easier to do with this. What you do is you pinch the felt oval between thumb and forefinger, and you pull with the other hand. You need to pinch the fibres that you've already felted to stop them being pulled off, and then with the other hand you just pull off the excess. You might have to tear the fibres, but don't worry about that. And once that's all done, just felt round the outside edge to smooth it over a bit. You'll find that you get fluffy edges with this. Don't worry too much about that though, because we will be tucking those edges in when we stick on the backing. So keep felting. This takes a bit of time. I'm doing it quite quickly here. You'll be able to take a lot more time with it. I did put on a whole section of blue at the top here. What I would recommend if I was doing a workshop would be to add small sections a little bit at a time, just so you've got a bit more control over where the fibre's going. Make sure you've got enough fibre and not too much. As with all of the felting projects, you'll find that it's easier to add more fibre than it is to remove it. It is easier with this tops, as I say, because it's shorter fibre lengths, but still it's better if you just add gradually. Now what I'm doing is working just around that edge, that fluffy edge, and the needles at an angle so that I'm stabbing the excess fibres down and under what I felted. We don't want them coming out through the top, we don't want them to be seen, so just to keep that oval edge, because it has been cut to the exact size of the brooch that I'm going to be sticking it in. We don't want too much fibre going over the edges because we'll have to hide it later and it makes the edges bulky. So just tuck it under and then stab around the outside edge just to smooth it out. Now what I'm doing is I've got this is tops, this is Corridel white tops, and just pulled off a small section because we're going to be making the clouds here. So pull off a few fibres because you'll see that they're much longer than what we've just been working with. I'm just rubbing them between finger and thumb just to ball them up slightly, just so we don't have too many wispy edges. And when you stab this, you don't want to stab too close together to start off with. You want to stab over the whole area just to anchor all of the points. You'll find if you just stab in one area and try and work your way along, you'll end up drawing all that fibre in and you'll end up with just a dot of white fibre rather than a wispy cloud, which is what we're after. So stab at one end, then the other end, in the middle, just the outer edges of where you want that cloud to be, and then you can work around it and go over the top just to flatten everything down later. So doing the same again, just got that fibre there, and just stabbing the outer edges again, just laying it where I want it. This bit you have to do really slowly, just so you get that control that you'll need to get those fibres in the right position. You'll find if you try to do it too quickly, you'll end up with just blotches of fibre, which isn't what we want here. If you wanted a more defined cloud, you could use a thicker amount of fibre. I've just used a small amount of fibre here. And you'll see I'm just rotating the end of my needle in just the wispiest parts of the fibre, and that's just to wrap it round the needle before I stab it in. It's just a way to get rid of some of the wispy ends. You can also cut them off at the end if you wanted to with some sharp scissors. Now just going over catching those last bits again, and that's just to neaten things up. You want things to be quite neat with this. You'll find if you don't felt it enough, if it's not properly felted throughout, that it will get wispy over time. We are going to glue this onto the metal back. Just lifting it again, you can see those loose fibres. We're going to glue it onto the back, which is going to catch the fibres we've pushed through and lock everything in place. So don't worry too much, but we do want a reasonably well felted piece. Now I'm just pulling off some more of the broken tops there. You can see how wispy it is. And this is going to be one of our hills, so I'm working from one side to the other, and I'm working at an angle. I want a bit of a curve going downwards towards the centre there, just to give that indication of a hill. Now to do this, what you have to do is you have to do the topmost edge first. Again, I'm just pulling off some excess, because the top edge of the hill is the bit that we're really going to have our eyes drawn to. The bottom bits we need to felt in place as well, but just to get that shape, just do your top edge first and then go around the outside like we did with the blue, and just stab everything in. Just clearing up the edges there. Also just pulling off any loose fibres that I don't want in there. Sometimes they'll be mixed in with other colours, and once you stab them in they really do show up quite strongly. Now getting a slightly different green. You can't see it as well in the video, but in real life it's a lot brighter than the first green. I tend to use darker colours in the background and then use lighter colours coming forward into the foreground for my brooches. You can do whatever you prefer. Some people like to have pictures up of actual landscapes and to copy them across. I just kind of make up the basic shapes for these ones. So again, see, I'm just doing that topmost edge of the hill. That's the bit that we're really going to be looking at, so just get that where you want it first, and then you can felt downwards and outwards from that line. Okay, so just going around the outside edge now just to pull everything in. Don't worry too much about the middle, because we're going to be stabbing straight down on that just to flatten it, but as long as we've got the edges that we really care about, which is the top edge of the hill and the outside edge, that's all that really counts. And then we'll just do a thorough stab over the whole area. Now with the fibre that I'm using, the broken tops, it has been dyed. It's also been hand carded, and the reason that's been done is so that I could add some different colours. So there's different greens mixed in together, just to give a real depth and texture to the fibre that I'm using. Just because it's such a small amount, you really want it to work for you. So mix some different greens together, and that gives you just a nicer look really. Now I'm going to define this top edge, and the way to do that is you stab towards the colour, so that here I'm stabbing right on the edge between the green and the blue, and the needle's pointing so that I'm stabbing down and under the line of the green. What this does is it catches those loose fibres and tucks them in so that you get a real neat, you can see it there, neat line. I'm going to be doing the same with the other green here, and notice again how the needle is pointing down and under the green. It's just catching those loose green fibres and stabbing them just away, which again just gives that nice controlled line. And you can control it a lot better this way too, so if you wanted to change the line of the hill and just tweak it slightly, you can do that here. And this is why we did so much blue underneath, because we are going to be sort of shifting that green about. We don't want to see the felt underneath. Okay, so now that's that in place, I'm just stabbing over it again, just flattening everything down, going over the whole thing. Just look out for any areas that look fluffier than others. We want it to be just a complete sheet of felt, but just with those defined edges there. Where we did that line tucking under, it also gives kind of a little ridge, which gives you a sense of depth, which is always good. So now just looking at those blue fibres that are sticking out at the back and just stabbing them down and in, but I've got the needle at a really low angle, so I'm not stabbing these fibres through the other side, so we're not getting tufty bits tucked under. I'm stabbing them along and just in between the bit we've felted and the pre-cut piece of felt. So all the wispy bits and all the extra bits are being hidden away. We don't want those coming through this side and ruining it. Now I'm just stabbing, again look at the direction of the needle, I'm just stabbing down in an angle along where the hill is going, just to kind of mimic the way the grass would be. If it was a real hill, it would be going down the hill, so I'm stabbing that way just to emphasize that. Now I've just got a little bit more of the tops, the white roving, and I'm just balling up into a little ball. This is going to be our sheep. So you start off with your fine needle, just stab in the middle just to anchor it, and then we work around catching those little wispy bits and tucking them in, because we want to create a ball. So the basic body shape of the sheep, we're starting with just a little ball, just stabbing around, taking my time, just getting that real shape that I want. Now I found that this is just a little bit small for me. I'm not happy with it, but don't worry, because we started small, we can always add more fibre. So just getting it how I want it first, then I'm going to be grabbing a bit more white fibre, and we're going to be making this sheep a little bit bigger. Now if you wanted to, you could stick with it this size and just add a few more, so this would give you an option of having a whole herd of sheep if you wanted. I'm just going for the one sheep, so I just want it that bit bigger, so a bit more fibre here. Again, I'm just messing it up first and then rolling it between finger and thumb, which just lightly felts it, gets all those wispy bits all in together. We don't want those sticking out because they're a nightmare to get rid of at the end. So there, stabbing in the centre again, just over the top of the bit we felted already, and then just working around the outside edge, just catching it and putting it into the shape that we want, which is that sheep shape. So for the sheep, I tend to do more of an oval shape and then turn it into almost an N shape. So I stab upwards to just create the dip between the legs. You can just about see that there. There we go, so just going round again, just making sure everything's nice and secure. You want it really well sort of felted into place, and I'm just catching those last fibres, just twizzling my needle around in the long fibres and stabbing them in, just to get them out of the way there. Now as we've added the white, it has pushed the green up around it, so I'm just stabbing that back into place. The reason I'm doing that is because we want that real sense of depth, and to achieve that we just have to flatten the green so that the white stands forward ever so slightly. Okay, so just really defining that shape underneath the ball, just to create this place where the leg's going to go, and I'm doing that at the head area as well. What we want is just to push back the neck area so that when we sew in the head and the legs, they really stand out and give us that sheep look. So that should be the felting done for the moment. What we need to do now is to add in the legs and the head. Now I choose to sew these. I use sewing cottons there, and I've got 3 strands at the moment of sewing cotton. I don't bother tying a knot in. What I do is I just sew from the back. Okay, so I'm just pushing the needle through, and I want the needle to come through just slightly into the white, and this is going to be the back leg. Now I leave that little tail and I just pinch it with a finger and thumb at the back. That holds it in place whilst I do the little stitches. You don't have to worry too much about making it too secure, because we are going to stick the brooch back onto the back of this, and the glue is going to hold everything in place. So same again with the front leg, slightly into the white, just so it looks as though the leg's coming out of the body. And now for the head. For the head we're going to make a little triangle, so we start at the very top, which would be the forehead for the sheep. We're just going to do a little stitch. It's only small, this is just to be from the forehead to the end of the snout for the sheep. The next stitch we go slightly into the white for. Now this is going to represent the ear, so we just go back ever so slightly into the white. You can just see there that it's just in the white slightly. We're going to sew back in to the nose that we've just put in, so the end of the other stitch, we want the 2 stitches to meet there. Now the last one we're going to do it just underneath the stitch where we did for the ear, and again it's going to end in exactly the same place as the other 2 stitches. This just gives us a tiny little triangle effect, which is what we want just to represent the sheep's head. It doesn't need to be exact, it doesn't need to be anatomically correct, we're just going for kind of like a sheep look. I'm just pulling off some extra fibres there that just got in the way. Now once you've done this, just take your scissors and we're just going to trim off the excess. See, we've just got the the tails there at the back. Don't worry about those, as I say, they're not going to have any pressure put on them at the moment, so nothing's going to come undone. We're just ready for when we glue later. Next we're going to be adding some birds, so I'm using sewing cottons again here. These come in strands of six little strands all wound together, so all you have to do is just untwist them, so twist anti-clockwise, and then I just use my nails just to separate the fibres. I'm just going to use 2 strands at once for this, so just pull your finger along, leaves you with the 2 strands separate, pop them into your needle, and for this we're going to make the birds. Again, very simple, just 2 little stitches in a V shape to create that emphasis of a bird. So sew through from the back, and again, not bothering with any knots with this, just pinch it with your finger and thumb, just do a little stitch. Now the stitches you do, make them ever so slightly bigger than you think you'll need. This is because when you pull them tight they do shrink, so just make them ever so slightly bigger. You can, if you go wrong, you make the wrong size, you can undo it, just pull it through from the back, but I like to try and just get it right the first time because I'm lazy and don't like to have to undo. So started off with one bird, just a little V. I'm going to do the same here. I like to do the second stitch slightly overlapping the first stitch, and that just gives you kind of like a feeling for a body there for the bird. So you've got the 2 wings and the body, so just ever so slightly overlaps there. Now, could have stopped with just the 2 birds, but for me I prefer doing 3. I think 3 looks quite good when you're doing images. So I'm just going to do another one. I try as well not only to make the V's at different angles, but I like to do one that's upside down as well, just to give a different feel to the bird. When you are doing this though, try to do it so that it doesn't look like a face. You will find that the human mind likes to make faces out of everything, so if you do 2 birds at the top and 1 in the middle, it does tend to make you think of an eyes and a nose, so just try to avoid that as you're working. Again, just snip off the ends. So our last bit of sewing's coming up. We're going to be doing some little flowers. Again, you can felt these if you wanted to. I prefer to sew these in, just gives you that bit of extra control, and they do stand out a lot more. So just untwisting this again just doing 2 strands at once. The other bits that you've got you can always put to the side and use for another project. Now for the flowers, they're ever so simple, just like the other sewing. What we're going to do is just sew up from behind, just where you want your first flower to be, and again just hold that end. And what we're going to do is just to do a little knot, that's all. And you just hold the top part of the thread and just pull, and then put your nail just onto the knot and keep pulling, and that should hold the knot in place. And when you sew back through, do it as close to the knot as you can and just give it a little pull, and that's just one little flower there. If you wanted the flowers to be bigger, you can use more strands at once. If you wanted them to be smaller, use less strands. You can mix up the colours and use different colours if you wanted to. For me, I'm just sticking with the pink there. I think it works quite nicely. Also works quite well with yellow, just so that it really pops. There we go, so just keep adding them. Try to make them quite random if you can. Just look at the whole thing and just see where you think the next flower should go. You again can always cut them off or take them out if you don't feel that it looks right. And I try not to do too many at this point, just because if you do too many your eye just gets drawn to that and you lose the whole picture. I did do quite a short piece of thread for this, so I am struggling at this point to get the needle through. You can use longer threads if you want to. It was just what I cut at the time. So there we go, just doing the last one and pull through. If you found that your knots were a little bit loose because you weren't able to pull them as tight as you wanted to, you can use your needle just to catch the threads at the back here and just pull them so that you don't have loose threads sticking out at the front. Don't worry if it's a bit baggy at the back, because again we're going to glue it. Now here I've got some impact adhesive. This is just what I had handy. I would recommend using PVA or using some Mod Podge. This glue really didn't work very well here. It's just to say what I got handy. My proper glue's at the shop at the minute. So yep, just pop some onto the back.
if this was PVA, I'd go right to the edge, just do a thin coating. Then what you do is you position the felt into the brooch, make sure that you've got the brooch the right way up. You want the shortest distance from the brooch back to the top of the brooch, and that's the top. So now you just hold it with your thumb, and you want to put some real pressure on your thumb there, because what it's doing, it's helping the glue to stick. It's also stopping it from moving. You don't want that felt moving. And I'm using just the needle here just to catch any of those loose fibres, you know, the ones we had sticking out, and I'm just tucking them up, and what this does is it sticks those fibres into the glue behind and they get stuck into place, which gives you that really nice neat edge and helps everything to stick in. Now you can see I keep pushing with my thumb. I also keep moving it just a little bit. If you find that certain bits aren't in the right place, you can stretch them just a little bit at this point, which is great if you just need it to just to fit in that little bit better. And again, just pushing around the edges just to make sure everything's locked. Now with the glue that I used today, it hasn't got the time for you to stick the fibres in as well, so this is a little bit messier than I would like, but in a pinch it does work. So just those last edges, just really tucking it in and pinching right to the edge there, just so that everything holds in place. Now once you've done this, especially if you're using the PVA or Mod Podge, just leave it for a day before you wear it, ideally. I mean, technically you could wear it now, but if you caught it, it could come off. Just give the glue time to set before you start wearing it out and about. And there you go, there's your felted brooch in its metal backing.